Welcome, everybody. We're going to dive into the Akashic record and we'll bring out a story from the Akashic record in form of a myth. I encourage you to intuitively follow me and see what message is coming through to you through the symbols that will come through in the story. The messages are coded, and so you will know what it's trying to say. If this message is for you, if it's not, then the story will not in any way relate with you or anything, and you can leave it for somebody else who is going to get the message. Now, this is the story of Julian. Long before a crisis happened in Earth, the gods had already seen them. And so in the high halls of the Celestial Council, the Aka stood with his bow. His bow was drawn in patience because he was biding his time. And, biding his time and planning ahead is entirely his art. So an arrow was loosed across time. It took years. So it had to fly early because the world needed saving. The council hesitated because they were afraid that sacred knowledge could not be entrusted to a mortal, and they warned against it, but Thoth, the patron, the ancient keeper of wisdom, he sat among his towering stacks of codices with keys in his hands. The keys to hidden truths, crossing his hands because he had already chosen someone. He had been quietly mentoring one small soul from afar for years. Julian, a boy whose spirit craved wisdom the way the body craves food, just like Thoth. The Aka exhaled. Okay. And so the string sang and the arrow left the heavens. By the time it finished its long flight, the boy had become a young man, which of course was part of the plan. So the arrow descended one afternoon as Julian sat in a quiet park, lost in a book, drinking in cosmic ideas as easily as he was breathing. But he didn't notice that there was a man that was seated at the other end of the bench. You see, the stranger ate a ripe apple slowly, and he began to sing, to hum, a very low, magnetic, rhythmic tune. This was the god of pleasure in mortal disguise. Because, gods don't just sit randomly or sit anywhere by accident. The god of pleasure deliberately sat beside Julian because he knew what was happening. And so the arrow struck through the pages that Julian was reading into his mind. But you see, as the pure signal from heaven came down by her, the humming of the god of pleasure itself was a frequency. And so he planted a second seed that was hidden in Julian. Something to conflict the plan of heaven. And so Julian did not know any of this. He was not aware of this design. But all he knew was that he started to understand patterns. There was a sudden awakening. And he started to understand hidden patterns, geometry in the air. Even his hands would trace things. He said, "Oh, I don't understand, yet I'm a genius." There was codes beneath language. There was structure beneath cities. He started understanding sacred mathematics. Even without trying, it was just effortless. He could read faces. He could read the universe. But that was the problem, because even though he could read faces, he could not understand. His mind was moving at light speed, and people's mind did not. So he was growing impatient. He would become blunt. He would be bitter. His brilliance began to feel like a curse. But he tried. He still tried. Because although he believed that knowledge alone could earn belonging, he put up his best. He tried to put on his best drama-free mask, and he offered his friends the deepest things that he had, the hidden patterns of existence. But you see, they blinked very politely, and then they asked him to use his wisdom to calculate the lottery. So they loved him just like they loved the two. They would take him to parties. They dragged him to rooftop parties. They took him down into raves. Got a drink. Cheers. But even though he was surrounded by noise and bodies, he had never felt more invisible. He didn't understand the point of the rhythm, the sweat, the reckless joy. And whenever he tried to speak the things of the intellect, because, Julian eats knowledge like food. To them, he was just like, his knowledge was intoxicating. It was too strong. It was too much. And it was impossible for him to share. So Julian started to do what unseen people would do. He started to hide. He would go home after the wild nights and he will tuck himself in a closet. It was just like he was hanging back his true self in the back of the closets, behind the ordinary clothes, because it was like a costume that was too strange to wear in public. And so he started to feel that his personality was splitting, like his identity was splitting, like he had this attention-seeking part and then the part of him that wanted to withdraw. Does this sound familiar? The twins, one half moving towards the crowd and the other had the need to bolt the door, to bury itself in endless reading, calling the isolation self-protection. He had a moon self and a moon self and a sun self. So one night, as he was feeling the war waging within him, he stood in front of the mirror and he asked, "What is wrong with me?" High above, the council started to question. They were asking a different question. What's going on down there? In their viewing pool, they could see that the earth was unraveling. The oceans were shaken on plastic. Turtles, dolphins, they were tangled in a drifting net. There was a desperate rise, a desperate cry, like smoke. There is no planet B. Where is the Savior? And at the top of the long stairs, the golden throne, there was nobody seated there. It was meant for the healers of worlds. It was empty. And so the gods traced the corrupted frequency back to Julian's mind. And they found the seed that was planted. And so, furious thoughts called out, and the council called out to the god of pleasure. And then they demanded They demanded that he cleaned up the mess that he has made of their champion. And so, the god of pleasure just sat there, eating his apple, unmoved. He refused. The council fell silent. He said, "You mistake me. I did not poison your champion. I completed him. How can he save the planet that he does not love? How can he fight for the people that he does not care about? How will he even know what the earth truly needs when he only needs what is in a book?" Because how he only meets the earth is in a book. He escapes through a book. His knowledge is not practical. And so the council felt silent. When pleasure, he said, he believed, your champion believes that he does not belong among them. He says they do not see him. But has he ever asked himself if he has truly seen them? Do they feel seen by him? Because he offers them cold data and he calls it presence. Just call my seed a generosity. Call my seed a generosity. What you're naming a poison, dear council, it's the very elixir that he needs to survive. And so down on earth, we then see in front of the mirror, the last of the arrow's momentum finally arrived. And the true meaning of the seed blossomed open in Julian's heart. And it came like a letter carrying the shadow. It said, "What if you could send your problem away today?" And Julian understood. A little different from the way he understood equations. This time, he understood it beyond words. Just like you are understanding this beyond words. I don't need to say it straight. You know what it's talking about. Because the craving that has turned him into two was not a flaw. It was the missing half of his destiny. He was smuggled in by a god of pleasure who knew that wisdom without love is just a clever loneliness. He could not heal the world as a detached genius. He had to first rule himself. And that's not by bearding his desires, but by crowning them. So he took up the double-edged sword of the king. One edge is discipline, and the other edge was delight. The control that he can now finally realize that is not the enemy of pleasure. Because control is what makes the pleasure safe to keep. And so we see the reversal of fortune. The sabotage was the salvation, and the poison was the medicine. It was the wound that was the door. And so Julian stopped hiding inside his books, and he stopped performing at parties. This time he chose something rare, presence. So he took himself off of the anger. And I got this card twice, actually. So this was the core of the message. And he wore it out in the front door. This time not escaping humanity, but finally joining in. And so he anchored his brilliant mind and an awakened heart. And he began to teach the wonders to the crowd. And one day, without ceremony, He climbed the long stairs and he sat down on the throne that he had been waiting for all along. If the story found you, maybe you knew what it is to see clearly and to connect poorly, or you split yourself into two, the one who's performing or the one who hides, or maybe something else in the message, in the story that connects with you. Trust your intuition, okay? And we will see in the next story. Cheers.